Hey everyone, I'm Chris Howard. Welcome to Top of Mind. A special guest with me today to talk about value generation specific to AI, but could be used for multiple other things. So, Rita Sallam, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Chris. How are you? Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
It's great to have you. And one of the reasons, you and I have been involved in this topic for a long time, but one of the reasons I think you're just the perfect fit for it is because of your own background before you came to Gartner. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I'm for the past 20 years. I've been involved in data and analytics as a key part of my career. But prior to that, I was in two startups, and one of those startups, one of the roles I played was CFO. So have a lot of background as a finance person and sort of play double agent with technology CFO type of value research. So
Yeah, one of the
yeah.
things I loved about that when we first talked about it years ago was your experience in valuing intangibles, which was important then, clearly for startups because they're ideas, right? But I think also we can apply it to emerging technologies and innovations when sometimes the value isn't clear or maybe takes a different path from what people expect.
Yeah, I know it's particularly important, not just for emerging technology, but for all technology, because, sort of the most tactical types of benefit that we get from technology investments, including AI, are those that we can directly identify a financial value for, say, cost reduction, for example, reducing headcount. That's what we're seeing with AI, with Gen AI, but most automation types of technology, you're looking directly at cost reduction. But so much of the benefit that we get from technology are in these indirect or intangible benefits that come maybe two or three or four hops from the initial outcome, productivity being a great one, where we can create a theoretical value for productivity, but unless we actually harvest that productivity and realize the full productivity and apply it to something that's actually going to have a financial outcome, we're actually going to fail to realize the value that we expect. I can give you just simple examples of even coding assistants that most of our clients are experimenting with. We can give software engineers time back. We can give them, let's say, an hour a week back, but unless we take that hour and apply it to something that's going to have a financial outcome, and then we measure that, for example, we ask software engineers to work less,
Mhm.
so we have a better retention rate for our software engineers. That means we lower our cost to hire, which means that we reduce our expense for hiring and potentially improve our productivity over time or lower the cost per engineer over time.
Yeah, I think
We've
it's
made this.
It's an interesting point because one of the things I think about is like, what's the cost of losing an employee, right? Especially
That's right.
a really good one, and so the Gen AI tools in the hands of of a developer, that's a kind of a tool they're very attracted to because it fits the way that they work, right? They're looking for those kinds of accelerants, whether they're early stage developers or very experienced developers. I was reading some of the research earlier today around developer productivity because that's one of those numbers that Gartner clients like really wants. Like, give me a number, and even in the range that we have, it's somewhere between 7 and 55%. And it
That's right.
depends how it's applied. I mean, how do you justify such a range for something like that?
Well, because it's so dependent upon the specifics of the makeup of the software engineering team. Are they mostly experienced software developers or less experienced software developers? What are their specific tasks? What percentage of time do they spend on coding versus not? What is the overall process? Sometimes we make one part of the process more productive or efficient, and then the down the line processes are still the same one. So we just have a bottleneck and the overall process isn't necessarily improved. But I think the key is if we give people time back, how are we going to proactively manage that and make sure we don't have what we call productivity leak? Meaning if I give you an hour back, Chris, you may take a part of that and go have coffee with
I'm
your
gonna go play
friends.
piano is what I'm gonna do, Rita.
You're gonna play the piano, I
Yeah,
might go, I don't know, exercise or, shop
sure.
on Amazon or something. But, and then the rest of that time, you may apply it to something that is of productive use for the organization, but it may not be the thing that's gonna be the most productive for the organization. So what we're seeing is organizations really have to think about and proactively manage that time and how people work and incent them to use that time in a way that's optimal for the organization's, strategic to achieve
Yeah.
strategic priorities. Yeah.
And productivity is one of those topics that comes around every decade or so. And it's always
Yeah.
hard because we don't always have great baselines to know how productive we were to begin with. And so, do we know if it improved? Or, like you're saying, if time gets used in different ways, some of those ways can be leakage, like you're talking about. Some of those ways could actually be more productive because you're giving people time to think or to synthesize or just
Yeah.
breathe. Think. And so that's really key. But where you started, I think, is important in that we're seeking sort of early wins. But
Yeah.
the deeper value takes a longer time to play out, but it's also indexed to my own ambition. Like, what do I really want to do? How much value do I want to create? Because you could be very conservative. You could say, like, I'm actually going to do something transformative. And I know that in the framework that you have, you talk about extending or upending. Talk us a little bit about how you think about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the type of use cases that an organization invests in and the percentage of investment in the portfolio really depends on the AI ambition of the organization. Are you looking to defend your competitive position in the industry? Are you looking to differentiate and extend your existing processes? Or are you looking really to upend your industry and invest in completely potentially new products and services and core processes that are going to materially change the face of your industry and your position in that industry? And so some of the most of our clients right now are really in the defend and extend type of investment, lower hanging fruit, easier to buy, easier to deploy, coding assistance, different types of productivity assistance, easier to buy in terms of SaaS pricing models, easier to deploy in terms of less variability in cost, for them to implement and deploy and manage over time. But some of those general productivity tools at the same time are also much harder to justify and identify specific values. Just think about the word processor. I mean, if we had to, in retrospect, even today, define what was the full benefit of investing in, word processors back in the 80s, there's a specific benefit, which is the secretarial pool. We were able to reduce that significantly, if not take it out completely. But think about the actual benefit of word processing in terms of removing the physical limitation of ideation, of collaboration. I mean, how many more times can you iterate your ideas now that you can, backspace and correct and continue to refine your thinking? Who knows what the impact of that is? And similarly, some of these general productivity tools will likely have similar impacts, but impossible to measure when the CFO is pressuring you for direct cost reduction. How do you even talk about that?
That's a
You
to think about is to go back in your own history and say, where have we gained productivity over time with something, and look back and use that kind of as a means of measuring. Because there is certainly a tyranny of the quarter at play a lot of time, like deliver the savings now. And these tools aren't cheap. Some of these tools are cheap, and so there's a question about is it worth it? And so then the is it worth it answer is really about, well, how much would it cost for me to do this on my own? Maybe that's one of the things. And is it worth it for me to change the way that people work in order to adapt to an incoming technology? That's a big change. But when it comes to upending, so the upending part of your framework, it takes a lot of imagination, but also some courage, right? So strategic, because it often means you're changing something fundamental about the business model, or the way you make money, or who your customers are. So you're changing something fundamental about what you do, which is never easy, right?
That's right. I think at all levels, whether you're defending, extending, or upending, to get full value realization, you actually are going to have to rethink how people work, even for basic productivity co-pilots. But definitely as you move into the upending use cases, you're really doing strategic thinking about what role you want to play in transforming your industry. How are you going to transform your products and services, your core processes? You're an insurance company that as a new way to micro price risk in such a way that it dramatically reduces your losses relative to your competition, or you come up with a completely new native AI product or service that just changes the dynamics of the industry or even creates a completely new one. That is a lot harder. And it definitely requires a lot more risk because the investment involved, typically the deployment approach is going to be more custom, more fine tuned, maybe a custom model. Obviously, very few organizations are doing that, but the custom development and the custom application and the unique data that's required, maybe you have some very unique data that you're able to build around something that's really just going to change the way your industry operates. But to be able to deliver that, and particularly in such a fast moving market where there are new models every 2 days that come on the market, there is sort of potentially even a technical debt penalty for being an early innovator on the one hand, because you want to get something out quickly, but the market's moving so quickly. On the other hand, you're going to do that to get this early advantage and even just learn how to innovate and what works and what doesn't, and what the sort of the value of that technical debt, is that in exchange for that, you're learning, you're figuring out what's really going to move the needle in your industry. So you have to have a certain risk tolerance to be able to do that. Your board has to have a certain risk tolerance and be willing to commit a percentage of the portfolio to upending the industry. That has to be part of your ambition, your AI ambition.
I've talked on Top of Mind before about the fact that aspects of AI, and especially generative AI, which has been so dominant, and I don't want to always just limit it to that, but clearly entering the trough, people are figuring out the trough of disillusionment. People are figuring out how to use it, and one of the things that comes along with that, as I've been thinking about, is there's a lot of waste, and it's a necessary part of evolution. And as I've been thinking about sort of more about the beginning of a new S curve, so more of an economic concept, at the beginning of a new S curve, there's a lot of waste and financial, things that don't work, things that
Definitely.
sort of choices you make that may be wrong. There's just a lot of entropy at the beginning of an S curve that eventually settles. And you get into a period of momentum where the noise is attenuated. You figure out what works, and then you can leverage those things. I don't think we're there yet, but that's the next natural phase, is sort of learning together what works. So those that may have built their own, truly built their own foundation models in the beginning of this experiment might not if they were starting today.
That's
They're
right.
to invest in data and get it working more effectively with large language models and so on. And so I think we're kind of learning collectively. But thinking about in people being in the trough, beginning of this S curve, trying to figure out what to do. Give me a couple of the best pieces of advice that you would give to an enterprise about how to really start and what to measure and prove that it does create value.
Yeah, but let me just add to one thing that you said.
Sure.
I think those organizations that might have been early on that built their own large language models that would probably potentially not do that today, they learned a lot. So they're going to accelerate that next
Good point.
S curve.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think there is a certain amount of potential technical debt that you're just going to have to accept in exchange for being an early innovator. But I don't think that's wasted in this case. I think it's a way to sort of get you to the next S curve
Yeah.
much quicker. And so I think there's super a lot of value in that. But how would I get started? I would absolutely first think about what's your AI ambition? Where do you want to play? What's your risk tolerance at the organizational level? And then, of course, look at your business priorities and your strategic priorities as an organization. Any value story has to start with that. What are your key KPIs? How will your organization determine success? How are even your executives measured, and how do we align our investments to that success? And then, begin to, I think we've seen both top down and bottoms up ideation work really well. Going out to the business and having them ideate and, provide some ideas about use cases that would potentially solve problems for them. That's more of a bottoms up tactical approach, but also doing some of that strategic ideation. What's possible? What's art of the possible? What are other industries doing? And what's unique ways that not only am I using Gen AI, but how to combine different AI techniques and other technologies to truly come up with something that might transform the way that people work in the company, or the processes, or even new products and services. I think there has to be a strategic assessment of, where am I? What are my competitive advantages? What are my competitive moats? Do I have data that's unique to me? What are my competitors doing? What do I actually have to do in my industry to stay competitive or even be differentiated and leapfrog? We're seeing it's very different depending upon the industry. To be competitive in life sciences, you might have to actually have to do a little more upending type of investment
Mm.
where organizations are investing in clinical trials and drug discovery, whereas in other industries you may be able to do more differentiating and more less let's say risky or bigger bets. So you have to look at your own industry, and then you have to see within your own sort of competitive position what's going to work best. I have a mining company client, for example, that they sort of did this assessment and said, we're differentiated in this one aspect of the mining process, and we're only going to invest in AI use cases that help us extend that differentiation. Whereas we have other clients who are like, nope, we're going to let 1,000 flowers grow and figure out, what's really going to bubble to the top, and then have that experimentation. So I think, and then once you do that, really having a good value story when you begin to rank and prioritize investments by potential impact, potential competitive impact. Does it defend, extend, upend? What's the complexity of the deployment approach? Do we have the data? Do we have what's the risk level of these use cases that factors into prioritization? If I'm in a regulated industry, I actually have to factor in risk and potential compliance types of issues into how I prioritize and into sort of how I discount the potential value of those investments. Do I have the data that I need to be able to develop these use cases? What's the level of effort that's going to be required? What are the people issues? I think that's often overlooked. A lot of traditional AI types of applications, we automate processes. We have a fraud model. We embed that fraud model in a credit approval application. That just automatically would detect fraud and kick out potential exceptions that might indicate a fraud type of thing. That's different than if we're augmenting a person
Yeah.
and trying to get them to change the way they work. If we're not putting in place the associated change management and figuring out how do we proactively manage the extra time, we're not going to get the value that we realize. And I think that's where we see a lot of our clients sort of stumble with, say, some of these productivity assistants where they just throw out the tools without really thinking through how they're going to impact how people work, without actually helping users with how they would change their work to have the most impact on the processes and the work that they do, and then wonder why they're not seeing any value.
I know. I did this weird related to that the other day. I was making bread. And I kind of have a yeast anxiety when it comes to making bread, and I get impatient, right? And so, like, if you rush it or if you don't proof the yeast correctly, the bread's never gonna rise, right? And so I thought, well, that's kind of like, trying to rush a tool in and not actually preparing the environment, making sure it's warm enough and it has enough sugar and all those types of things in order to make it do the work that it's really meant to do. It's not the yeast's fault. It's my fault for being impatient and not preparing the environment. And I do see that behavior with clients in terms of there is an urgency to create return here, but it takes time to work these things into the environment and and be patient with that. Couple of things. One is you talked a little bit about finding out what your special data is, what your very special IP is. And in the pharma example, it's a good example where I have very competitive proprietary IP related to molecular design of drugs and things like that. That's a case where it's probably worth building a model of my own so that I can create the recombinations, the predictive recombinations of those molecules for drug discovery. And we do see that, right? So there are instances where the cost of doing that is absolutely worth it because the success that comes probabilistic exercise is extremely high value, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, some of these, again, upending investments, the potential upside could be huge, transformative, right? And so we almost potentially could look at them as sort of VC type of investment
Mm.
approaches where, you know, we may seed several of them with the expectation that, one of them potentially out of 10 or even more will hit big and be willing to accept some of the risk associated with that. But again, that has to be your ambition.
Yeah.
That, what our ambition for these investments is that we are going to transform the industry. We are going to be a thought leader. We're going to be first to the market.
Mhm.
And but in exchange for that, you have to think of those investments a little differently and not expect to have a return in the first 6 months,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not expect the return necessarily to be, these incremental cost improvements. The return has to be, we're going to move the market, we're going to create a new category, we're going to dramatically remove, change the cost structure of how the rest of the industry gets assessed. If I'm a public company, I'm going to look, I'm going to lower my cost profile by, 50, 60%, not just, incremental 5%. I mean, those are the type of thought processes that should go into these upending investments. We're going to
Rita,
really transform. Yeah.
Rita, this sounds really hard. But I know that your team has been working on tools to help make these
Yep.
assessments, that Gartner clients can use. That super valuable. And also, you have a series of data conferences, big data and analytics conferences coming up. Where you're going to be talking more about this for people that are data leaders. Maybe just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we do have several frameworks and tools to help our clients think through, what are those value stories? How do they sort of go about identifying and linking what are essentially technical outcomes to business outcomes that we can ultimately measure, and report on? How do you think about managing and minimizing productivity leak and proactively thinking about all of the elements that are necessary to actually harvest the value from things, particularly when they're not direct cost reduction or direct headcount reduction? And don't get me wrong, there are several types of use cases that have like a direct cost reduction use case and they're easier to justify. But we can help with all of those types of assessments. We also have our data and analytics summits across the globe starting in March. And of course, we cover a range of topics, everything around data analytics and how to prepare and support AI initiatives. And so including big topic for us at those summits are, how do you get value from all of these investments, and what's necessary? What are the necessary foundations that you need to drive value from all of these investments, including AI? Data and analytics plays a significant role in terms of AI ready data, in terms of governance, in terms of people, in addition to just being able to, assign a value to all of that is essentially a competency that we believe our clients need to have from the very beginning. When you're thinking about proof of concepts, when you're thinking about your investments, even at the conceptual level, having sort of this value management competency and thread through the entire process and then into measuring is really a competency that we see some of our, more successful leaders sort of mastering. And so that's what we hope to help our clients with.
So, one last question. Delivering value from AI, are you bullish or bearish on that?
I'm absolutely bullish, but it's hard. It's hard work. There's no magic bullet, and our clients have to develop that value management competency and continue to work at it and develop new skills generally, because it doesn't come easy. And it's a team sport. Like we can, sort of estimate a theoretical value of this stuff, but to actually realize the value is hard. It's hard work. It involves collaborating with the business side of things. It involves potentially redesigning work. It involves change management. It involves managing risk. And all of those things are not just under the purview of the data and analytics leader, the head of AI, or even the CIO or CTO. It requires, collaboration across many leaders to actually realize the value that we expect from all of these investments. And by the way, that goes for any tech investment. But AI has its nuances.
I know that's one of the reasons I love working with you is because you're a pragmatic optimist, is how I would describe. And
I definitely think it can be done, but it's hard work.
absolutely.
That's
All
yeah.
right. Thank you so much, Rita. Really appreciate the time you spent with us today talking about value. And there's a lot more to come. I know that there is. So keep everybody
Yes.
eyes open. And for all of you, thanks for joining Top of Mind. Thanks again, Rita. We'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Chris. Bye, everyone.